Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for being so transparent about your relationship to food. I would love to hear a video about what foods you don't eat and why. Specifically, I mean foods that are typically considered healthy yet are absent from your regular meals. One of the things that really stands out to me in your meal videos are precisely the things you don't eat. It would be super insightful to hear more about the negative choices you make. This was a comment left by Twilight in Avalon. Thank you for your comment, and I thought I would address this in a video, clearly. So it's true, there are many foods actually that I avoid eating for various reasons, but the main reason is that I focus on foods. We are only given a certain number of hours in the day in which to feed ourselves. So it stands to reason that we have to make selections discerningly. We can't eat everything. So I focus on foods that will nourish me internally and that will help my brain, most of all, brain feeding foods. Anorexia nervosa is an extremely serious mental illness. So my focus became on feeding, quite literally, my brain, because I knew that my mind, that my cognitive function and my capacity to make clear and deliberate and healthy decisions moving forward, I knew that that was reliant on the health of my brain, first of all. So my brain, as well as the rest of me, had been starved at that point. I was in, at my worst state, I was physically emaciated. I don't want to say the weight that I was because it's disturbing, but it was in the double digits. So I'm a woman who is 5'5", so average height, and I weighed in the double digits. So very underweight and ailing, not only physically, but more so mentally. So there was that anguish that anyone who has experienced anorexia nervosa will attest to, that it's agonizing every day, all the time, every moment of every day that you are in it. It's extraordinarily tormenting, mentally most of all. So of course the physical body suffers, but I knew that I had to feed my brain first and foremost if I had any chance of recovering. So I leaned heavily on my education in Ayurveda as well as my functional medicine background, and I devised a plan for me that would focus on brain bolstering, brain boosting foods, namely omega-3 fatty acids, essential fatty acids like fatty fish, all the foods that you hear me touting the benefits of to this day. These are foods that are healthy for everyone, of course, but I knew that I would have to focus my attention to fat, healthy fat, like omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin K2, and vitamin E. So these fat-soluble vitamins. And I also focused on foods that were high in cholesterol, because the brain is comprised mostly of fat and cholesterol. It's a bundle of fat and cholesterol, in fact. And those nerves, the neurons, the neuronal cells in the brain are insulated by this fatty cholesterol matter, the myelin sheath, and I knew I needed to increase my consumption of fat generally. So I did that with foods that I still eat to this day, like cod liver in its own oil, beef liver, one of my beloved foods that's a supplemental food that I call that my, nature's multivitamin, really. Whole eggs, like pasture-raised eggs with the yolks. These vitamin D, A, K2, and E rich foods. And I really dove into feeding my body very intentionally with those foods. And I chose that way to recover, something that I would be able to sustain for the long term, longevity, really. I knew that if I followed a quote-unquote all-in approach of eating certain foods like, ultra processed foods and just eating everything really, I knew that that would not serve me personally, because I know myself, and I knew that I would then later have to decondition myself from those foods, because those foods don't serve longevity in the least, like sugar, processed foods, these things, which I do eat on occasion, I want to say. I don't avoid them entirely. I eat them on special occasions and also just whenever I feel like eating them. But I find myself not inclined to be desiring of those foods, because I fill my stomach with other foods. So it comes down to choice, of course. And this is why I say that I do think whether or not you have an eating disorder, regardless of that, I think the hardest thing that we humans are tasked with, one of the hardest things, is maintenance of anything, really. Maintaining the weight, in this case, body weight, maintaining the weight at a healthy weight that is going to allow you to be strong and thriving and mentally clear, able to make decisions, as a functional human being, and have stable moods, stable sleep, all of these things. That's actually harder, I think, than either losing or gaining weight. Both losing and gaining weight are also difficult, of course, but I think it's harder to maintain and then sustain that maintenance throughout the lifespan. So I'm very blessed that I am in a maintenance phase where my anorexia nervosa is in remission, long time remission at this point. So I can say that clinically speaking, I have made a full recovery. But that's why I say that I take things day by day, because I really do, not just with anorexia recovery, but just in general. I know better than to have any expectations in either direction. I do my best to practice living moment to moment, because the following day is not guaranteed to us, of course. So each new day is a gift, and I truly look at it that way. I have a gratitude practice and a meditation practice that is my guiding light, that I rely on for my, for many things, but those tools, yoga and meditation coupled together, those tools are invaluable to me as I continue managing myself. But the food choice, it really comes down to, anorexia aside, food choice is a very personal thing. I have experimented with all kinds of diets, all sorts of ways of eating, timing of eating, all of that. Because I'm curious of the experience. I want to experience all of those. I want to have those experiences. But I've always come back to my way of eating, my particular way of feeding myself, it produces the most harmony internally, and it seems to be feeding and fueling my body very beautifully, very harmoniously. So I get feedback from my body, like regular menstrual cycles and regular sleep patterns and stable moods and all of these things. That's your body giving you feedback. And sometimes it needs more of X and sometimes it needs more of Y. And I always respond to my body's signals accordingly and appropriately from a nutritional standpoint, but also from my own background of having done all of these experiments on myself in the past with food. If you are avoiding a certain food or certain foods because those foods make you anxious, I think that's very different than avoiding certain foods or restricting certain food groups or foods because you simply don't desire to consume those foods. My point is, I guess, you have to be very honest with yourself and ask yourself, why am I restricting this and this food? And I also want to make a point to say that we tend to use that word restrict, especially in the eating disorder space. People tend to use that word it's like a 4-letter word, restriction, thou shalt not restrict. I don't agree with that. I think not only in eating disorders, but in life, certain restrictions are appropriate where they might be appropriate. So, set and setting, context and intention matter. So you have to check in with yourself and be very honest. None of this works if you are self-deceptive. So you have to be very honest with yourself and face that. And if there are certain food groups or foods that you are avoiding because they make you anxious to consume them, then that's worth exploring and examining and then challenging. That's definitely worthwhile. But for me, it's been a very different experience. If I write down, for instance, all the foods that I consume typically on a daily basis, there are a number of foods, of course, that I'm leaving out of that because I only have one stomach and I can only eat so much. And so because I make the choices that I make, it means that there's no room, quite literally, there's no physical room to eat more than what I choose to eat. And I make those choices that I make very intentionally. So that picture, as I've said before, that picture of what you choose to eat, what you choose to put in your body, as well as what you elect to avoid eating and what you choose to not put in your body, those choices are very personal and have all kinds of variables that are involved in your decision making. Another thing I do is that I have so many healthy foods that I want to include that I will rotate. So for 2 weeks, I'll eat a certain type of diet, and then for the next 2 weeks, I'll plug in certain other foods. And I do that because of variety. I think something that gets lost in the nutritional space is the value of variety and having all kinds of nutrients in the diet. I think people get fixated on one thing, just fixating on one particular type of food or food group, as well as excluding one particular food or food group. The focus on one thing is at the exclusion or neglect of a completely other thing. And in this case, we're talking about nutrients, which the body benefits from a variety, but I can't, I do share what I eat here and there. I share the foods that I eat and the foods that I recommend others with whom I work to eat because they have benefit, they have inherent nutritional benefit, but it's going to come down to you as an individual. Nobody can, you're the one that puts the fork to your mouth. So I'm unsure of how helpful that is, my response, because it's not for me. Ironically, it's not that deep why I don't eat the foods that I don't eat. It just simply comes down to I have a preference for the foods that I do wish to eat, and I focus on nutrition and how I feel and my moods and my sleep and all of these things and the feedback that I get from my body. I focus on those things. So that's the diet. The diet that I eat is what makes me feel the best, what makes me perform optimally in my life. And that's going to be different for everyone, I think. The last thing I will say is that your body will keep the score. Your body will be the best tool, feedback mechanism if you listen and pay attention and have self-awareness and you don't delude yourself. Your body will send you the signals of what it needs, what nutrients it needs. But this is why when I first started to recover years ago, this is why I focused on feeding my brain fat mostly, primarily, really. My diet was comprised of like 70 to 80% fat from these, fatty fish and cod liver, whole eggs, beef liver, grass-fed beef, these healthy sources of fat, avocados, but I really did focus on animal fats. But diet is such an individual thing. The best thing you might be able to do with yourself is to experiment and see how you feel. All of the speculation and anecdotes from other people, that will serve as just more noise. But you have to experience for yourself. Sometimes experience is the greatest teacher. and keep a journal and write it down, and write down what foods serve you in which way. And that might help you land on a diet that you can have be sustainable for you. Because I think that's what's lost, is that a lot of people recover from eating disorders in a cookie cutter fashion, but then they are left with having to almost recover from their recovery. And I knew I didn't want that. I wanted to set myself up for the long term. And that tends to be, I don't know if that's just my upbringing, but I tend to be forward thinking. And I think of the bigger picture, not just the short term, but how am I going to want to feed myself from a longevity standpoint? And will these foods serve me? Will they sustain me? So that's what I kept coming back to. That was like my North Star in my recovery, was the sustainability of that for me. I didn't want a quick fix. I knew it was a serious matter, this recovery from this mental illness. It was a serious thing that I took very seriously. So I don't know if any of that has helped. It is such an individual thing, and the onset of the illness is going to also, whatever the root of your illness was, if you also had anorexia nervosa, so many things go into it. And the way you recover, it's going to look very different from the way others recover. I say that because I know that my recovery picture, if I look at other like recovery content creators, mine doesn't match that experience at all in any way, shape, or form. So that might be helpful as well to curate your digital space so that you are not consuming content that perhaps might not influence you in the most healthy way, especially during your recovery. So it might be tempting to look at recovery channels, but I would advise against that because it's almost like too many chefs in the kitchen. You are recovering for you, and you're going to have to sustain and maintain yourself independent of anything else externally. So it's not probably going to be helpful to look at other people's lives because you're the one, this is going to matter for you. You don't want to just copy what someone else does and expect the outcome to be the same or similar. So I wish you the best of luck, and I am uncertain whether this was helpful or not. I hope that it was in some small way, and feel free to leave me a comment down below and just maybe tell me something about yourself. I would love to read anything, but I would love to read that. So give me a little random fact about yourself, perhaps, and say hello in the comments down below. I thank you for watching, and you shall see me soon.